just being a person who's in the nightclub scene in Hollywood, I was like, oh, I know who this person is. Like, I knew who she was. And I was like, oh, shit. I'm doing a party for Mick Jagger and Rick Rubin at the biggest madam in Hollywood's house. And I'm like, and it's Friday and the party's tonight.
Hey guys, Pat here. You're tuned into the Founder Hour, and today on the show is Brent Bolthouse. He's the founder of Bolthouse Productions, which owns and operates a Santa Monica staple, the Bungalow, and also puts together the Neon Carnival, the ultimate Coachella after party with high-end brands and celebrities in attendance year after year. But before all this came about, Brent was a kid growing up in Southern California, moving around a bunch until finally settling in LA in the 1980s and working at a gas station for minimum wage to make ends meet. After meeting a friend while going to cosmetology school, they started promoting at nightclubs and throwing parties together. They were a major success from the start, and Brent eventually branched out and started Bolthouse Productions and continued to throw parties and corporate events for A-list celebrities for decades to come. He's been involved with the creation and growth of many of Hollywood's most famous nightclubs, which you'll hear more about on the show. Brent's got an incredible story, and we can't wait for you all to experience it. We started off this awesome conversation by learning a bit about his childhood.
Well, I mean, I was adopted at birth, and I grew up kind of all over Southern California. So we lived in Riverside, and then we went from Riverside to like Lake Arrowhead area, Running Springs, and then from there we went to Barstow, and from there we ended up in Joshua Tree.
Wow.
So it was kind of my dad moved around, yeah. Because he had, in the 70s, he had a gas station, and he lost it in the gas wars, and he got a job in a restaurant supply company, so he sort of was like, if he kept moving to different territories, he kept getting promotions and raises. So, and he ended up in Palm Springs, which is, at least in the 80s, was like a big restaurant town, right? Mm-hmm. So, and he was in a restaurant supply company, so he ended up becoming like the regional manager. And so it was sort of like as far as he could go in that company without moving to LA, which my dad doesn't like big cities, so neither does my mom.
So for that, it meant like you're kind of switching schools a bunch, like going from school to school. Yeah. And so what was your friend group like? Like, was it tough to like have to keep, making friends and switching friends? And
well, I mean, obviously as a kid, I think, that it has to be tough, right? I mean, but I don't think you know how tough it is because what do? You can't be like, no, Dad, I'm going to stay. See you guys, you're 7. You're like, no, you guys can leave. So I think, but yeah, I mean, of course, it shapes how you are as an adult. It was probably harder than I knew at the time.
So what was like your the longest like city or area that you stayed in, or were you finally settled?
Well, yeah, we, like I said, so we lived in Riverside till I was about 5, and then we lived in Running Springs, which is near Lake Arrowhead, for like a year. Which, as a kid, it was like, oh, this is awesome. I went from a city to like the mountains, and we were we're skiing, and mountains was such a, it was like a all-day holiday. And then we ended up in Barstow, and we lived there for like 4 years or something. For a while, a good stay, and then we had to move from Barstow, which I certainly wasn't happy about.
Yeah.
Because I went from Barstow, where we were in sort of a community, like a typical suburban kind of scenario with like sidewalks and track houses, and it was the late 70s, and we were skateboarding, and we had drain pools, and we were listening to the Sex Pistols and the B-52s and skateboarding. And then I went to Joshua Tree, where there was like dirt roads, so I didn't really have skateboarding anymore. So that was certainly a loss of sorts, and I didn't love it.
Mm-hmm.
So from 5th grade, I stayed in Joshua Tree on. That was sort of where we stayed.
Gotcha. And is that where you ended up going to high school as well?
Yeah.
While you were in high school, what was Brent's kind of goals or vision of the future? Were there any, and what were they?
There wasn't really any of that. So, in high school, I had a big problem with drugs. So and I was pretty rebellious. So I was sort of that generation of, it was the early 80s, and, you know, I found myself hanging out with, you know, punk rock kids, and that's what we were. And there was like 6 of us in that little desert town. There was a very small minority of punk rock kids, and so we were sort of angry. I was angry probably because I'd moved out of a town where I had friends and I had no friends, and so early on I found drugs and alcohol is sort of like, I like this, and it sort of made some connections with probably the wrong kinds of kids, and then we sort of became the kids of the punk rock variety, which we were the minority. So we were the kids that we were getting beat up by like weird jock guys and called fags because we had mohawks and we're weird, right? So sort of like this weird experience of like, what? We didn't. I don't even think we knew what a fag was. It wasn't. There was no context of like anything, and it, you know, which I always think is great because in that little town we all were white, so there was no ethnicity, really diversity there. So it was just sort of like there was no real prejudice because it didn't exist. So as an adult, I kind of look at it going, well, I don't have that stereotype because it just wasn't part of like what we were. We certainly had the stereotype of like certain class sects, so like jocks, heavy metal kids, for punk rock kids, you know, and sort of that. But I was always that kid that got along with everybody in high school.
And Brent, how do you think that, you know, impacted you? You know, the experimenting with the drugs in your high school years.
I think experimenting is the wrong word. I think I was a crazy drug addict who was like doing crystal meth for 10 days at a time. Okay.
Wow.
So.
And what sort of short-term impact that, you know, did that have during those years?
Well, I mean, obviously, it affected my family life. It affected my, you know, my friends. We were all just kind of out of control. My parents were simple people that grew up on farms in Illinois and just really, I don't think they even knew what drugs were. So I don't think they, at some point, they didn't know what was going on with me. They just knew they had this crazy rebellious teenager. And then at some point, I think they figured it out when I would be like, I'll be home in an hour, and I didn't come home for 5 days. I think they figured out something was wrong. So that was certainly part of my youth. And that projected me into getting sober at 16. I went to rehab, got sober, turned my life around some big time, and then I moved to LA at 17, just as I finished 10th grade.
So you dropped out of high school?
Dropped out of high school.
And moved to LA. Why did you move to LA?
To get sober. Okay. Because there was a guy in rehab. His father had a halfway house in North Hollywood, and he said, I have a bed, you should come stay at my house, instead of going back to the friends I had in the desert that were doing drugs. That could have been San Diego, that could have been anywhere, right? I don't know. I just said okay. That was just who I knew, and he happened to be in North Hollywood, and that led me to LA. So there was no real plan to come to LA. It was just really like I needed to be sober, and I needed to be away from the kids that I was with, and I wanted to be sober. I had a strong desire to embrace being sober.
Of course, at 17 years old, you're still a young kid, you know, and it seems as though at this point you just wanted to get your life kind of back together. But was there anything else that you wanted to do while you were in LA besides that? No.
My focus was being sober. So I lived in a halfway house. I went to meetings. I worked at a gas station and with a lady who happened to be sober also. So she only hired sober guys. So it was like I had this great early sobriety where it was like I lived with sober people, I went to meetings, and I worked with sober people. So it was like this great foundation of like everything I did was sort of like eat, sleep, drink, sober.
Right.
So, and I didn't have much, you know, the ambition was to stay sober, right? That's sort of what I knew. I knew like that was my primary purpose, was that. And from there, what I was being told by people around me was like, you know, these promises do come true. If you stay sober, anything can happen. Like, it was just like, okay, I'm not, that's sort of what was really, all I was really focusing on at that time.
So you were working at the gas station, and this is like your late teens, right?
I started there when I was 17.
17.
So I got sober in November, and my birthday's in December. I had my birthday in rehab, and then I moved to LA like in January. So I was like just turned 17.
What year is this?
I think it's 86.
Okay.
or 87.
And what was LA?
Maybe it's 86. I don't know.
What was the LA scene like at that time? I know you were kind of focused on getting sober, but like just overall, what do you remember from that time?
Well, at that point, I don't remember anything. I lived because I was working at a gas station in Sherman Oaks.
Okay.
So to me, there was no, and if anything, my dad instilled like hard work in me. So it was like I was the guy that would like work a double shift or work on Christmas because I got time and a half. Like I was always just sort of like working, like we worked. So it was like when you work 8 hours a day and you're making minimum wage or $4.25 an hour, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you're sort of like, it was very just, I wasn't going out. I didn't even know what that was. Like I knew we had come from LA when we were teenagers, just like some punk rock concerts and some stuff in the city. We would go here, Irvine, kind of around, but we didn't know, like there was no real context at that point of like nightlife or doing something in that space or thinking about those terms. Like I did, as I got a little bit older, that kind of came into focus, but at that point it was really nothing.
So when did you start getting into the promoting scene and kind of really accelerating where you're at today?
So, I worked at the gas station for, I don't know, like I want to say 1.5 2 years, maybe year and 5, I don't know, year and 10 months, whatever it was, right? And so my dad said to me, if I go to college, I'll help you with your rent. I'll pay your rent. And when you're making...
And they're still at Joshua Tree at the time?
Yeah, they're still living in the desert. And I said, and when you're making minimum wage or $4.25 an hour, whatever that was, and your dad says he'll pay your rent, that's a big deal. Yeah. Right? Because you're like, okay, that's a big deal. So I'm like, great, I'm going to go to college. So I started doing some research, and the part of my path in life is that I'm undiagnosed dyslexic who never was treated for that or identified as that in school. So like math was great and English was terrible. Like I could never get that. So I was like, I don't want to go back to school. It's terrifying learning. So I started doing research and I was like, oh, I can go to cosmetology school at Santa Monica City College and I can be in college. My dad will pay my rent. So somewhere in my drugged out fantasy in the desert, I cut some girl's hair short, like his hair, right? Short like that. And she could wear it, right? She just looked great with short hair. Right. So everyone was like, who cut your hair?
It's like Katy Perry with short hair now.
Right. It was like who cut your hair? And it was like, Brent did. And so then everyone started coming to me to cut their hair. And I got this reputation as cutting people's hair. And I would barter. So it would be like, oh, I'll cut your hair, give me a joint. Or give me some Coke or some crystal or some mushrooms, like whatever it was. I was like, great, let's barter for haircuts for drugs. It was like a great business. And so I was, for whatever reason, cutting hair made sense in my brain. Like I could figure out how it looked okay on people. I don't know why, and so I didn't like mess up people's hair too bad. So I was like, I can go do that. And I kind of was like, okay, I'll go cut hair. So I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I got myself in cosmetology school. Not exactly what my dad probably planned, right? He probably was thinking a little more business or just regular school. But, he paid my rent. And that was probably around the time when I was thinking, I got introduced to some more people and some different networks of people and people going to nightclubs and going out, and that was kind of a fun life. So I definitely started to experience that a little bit more.
And this is during your college years? Or Santa Monica,
so
years?
I feel like cosmetology school is only a year long. It's like a year course. Okay. At least back then it was. It was like...
It's more like a program.
No, it was you had to do it, but it was like... Because it's a state... You got to get a state license, so you have to be certified. You got to be certified. So it's a certain thing, and you do it, and they just happen to have that course at SMC. But I don't think it's not like a 4-year thing or a 2-year. I really think it was a year because I went through that, and I was in that class, and I was and for whatever reason, like I had met a handful of people, and I had met a couple guys that were designers, and a couple artists, and a couple people, and so I was kind of going out a little bit and doing some stuff, and I got to assist. So when you cut hair, what you do is you get out of cosmetology school and then you go assist at a good hair salon if you're lucky, and then you work for someone that's great who teaches you how to do it. So
it's kind of like an apprenticeship.
Exactly. So as I was in college, I was apprenticing at a really hot hair salon at the Beverly Center.
Okay.
Right. So I was sort of like 2 steps ahead. So I'd be already an apprentice. So at the time I got out of school, I would be that much ahead of that. And so when I worked at a hair salon, I can also then take like color classes at Vito Sassoon or at Sebastian Hair. And like, so it'd be like, I was getting all like triple education.
Right.
Right. So when you come out, I was like, I'm going to be really ahead of the curve. But in that plight in there, I slipped a disc in my back and I had to have major back surgery.
Oh, wow.
So I went like 9 months of cosmetology school, and then I couldn't really stand on my feet anymore. I had to be bedridden, and I had to have back surgery. So, and that was in 1988.
Okay.
And that kind of came to a head around my, I had surgery for my back on or around my birthday, like before my birthday. And so it was in December, I know that. And so I had to drop out of school and then went and did that, had surgery, and the pain was like relieved so much that literally, like let's say I had surgery on the 16th of December, I was back out at a New Year's Eve party in LA for New Year's Eve.
Wow.
Like it was like, I was ready to go.
Hell of a doctor.
Well, when you have a pinched nerve, it's just like someone touching you and then they're not touching you. It was like that. The surgery pain was there, but the pain of the nerve that was going down my leg was completely gone, and it was like a miracle because I was in so much pain. It was debilitating, crippling pain. So the kind of pain where you make deals with God, like, okay, if I can just get through this, I promise you, I'll save everybody. Like, it was just like you making all these deals with God in bed crying. So then I went. So at that point. I'd met a handful of people, and this kid who went to Otis Parsons was like, let's do a nightclub together. And I was like, what?
And you're like barely past 18?
No, I'm not. I just turned 19.
Yeah.
And he was asking you to start a club with him?
With him, right? So I was like, no. I said no. The first 10 times he asked. I was like, no, I didn't understand. I didn't even understand what that meant.
Who was he though? Was he like part of that scene?
So this kid Tafu, who was an artist, and he was at Otis Parsons, and for whatever reason, he felt like, I don't know, I can't tell you to this day like why he asked me to do it. He obviously saw something in me, or I think when you're young and you're a kid and you're like, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, let's do it. Like, you just don't think like, so. I had a couple friends of mine that were designers, and they were like, I was telling them, he kept bugging me about it. And they knew him too. And they're like, listen, we started talking about it. And they're like, you should just try it. You got nothing to lose. It was really like a conversation we had. Like, and I was like, okay. So I said yes. And then I remember, so he was like, we got to find a place to do it. And I remember at one point I had some friends that went to USC, and they had done, I went to a party with him where you like get on a bus and you go to a place and then you go to drink and then you get on the bus and you leave, right?
With like those, what are those, frat formals or whatever?
Something. Yeah. I don't know what it was, but I remember this one place they took us to do it, this restaurant on Sunset Boulevard. And I was like, oh, I know a place. So we went and looked at this place, and it actually was the place we ended up doing our first nightclub at, and we did it. We ended up doing it there. And so he made flyers that were really, he was really artistic. So he like found creative paper and different inks and like did this weird process, would make these really interesting artistic flyers. And I was the person that went out and handed them out.
Where is the money coming from for this project?
Don't even know. Couldn't tell you. There was no money in the beginning. So the only thing we had to front was like printing of the flyers.
What about like rent?
We didn't have to pay rent because it was like a promotion on a Friday night.
Got you.
They took the bar, we took the door, right? So, and we paid the DJs and I don't know, some security, I guess. I don't really remember. And the cashier who took the money, right? So that was sort of what we did. So I literally went around and handed out flyers, and we did that first party, and there was like, it was bananas. There was line to get in, so many people coming, and Fire department closed us down.
Why do you think that was? Why do you think it became such a hot spot that day or that night?
I don't know. I think I went to every nightclub in the city and stood outside the door and handed a flyer to every person that left and said, come to my party. And I think Taft had a little bigger of a network and knew some people. And I think it was, a classic outliers. It was the right place, the right time, the right set of circumstances. So we picked a location that had parking. We picked a night that no other big promoters at that time were doing a party. But we didn't know those. We didn't know. Now I can call the phone and ask 10 people, what are you doing? What are you doing? And we know we had a plan. At that time, we just didn't know. So there was no obstacles on that first night that we did that. So we did that, and it was really successful. And so we said, let's do it again. And our format was, we'll do it the first Friday of every month. We started doing that. We did 3 of them. And then finally the owner, and they all were packed and people came. They liked the party. The owner said, why don't you do something on a weekly basis so that because we were making him money.
Yep.
And so we were so we sat down with him to negotiate, and he starts the negotiation. He goes, I'll give you half the bar. And we're like, great, done deal. Negotiations are done, right? We're smart enough to know that. And then somehow, and this is where I think God or the universe or whatever you want to call it, there's always divine intervention in my life, where it was I said, here's what we're going to do. I had a marketing plan. My marketing plan, we were going to make that club $1 to get in. And at that time, every nightclub in Los Angeles was $10 to get in. I don't care where you went, you paid $10, right? Every big nightclub, that's what it was back in those days. Everybody paid. It's not like today. And so I was since we're getting half the bar, we know we're making money because people are going to drink. And so let's just make it $1.
Let's just get more people in the door.
So it was this Wednesday night. We did it on Wednesday nights. We called it Papa Willie, and we made it $1 to get in. And it was and I went to every nightclub I went to State Beach, nightclubs, Universal City Walk, concerts. I handed out flyers everywhere. I was an animal, right? So, and it was just, that thing. And so I think that was, you can probably speak for yourselves. Hey, let's go. We can go to the club on Wednesday night. That's new. It sounds cool. It's got DJs we like. For $1, who cares?
Right.
Nothing to lose.
What's the worst that's going to happen?
If it sucks, we'll leave.
Right.
So I think that was part of the success. And that club became the it club of the summer. Right. In those times, it was there was always one night that became the premier night in town for the whole week. And that became that club. That was where
What was the club's name?
Papa Willie.
Papa Willie.
And it was
you changed the name?
We changed the name from the first club. The first club was called Opus Lily.
Okay.
And then Papa Willie was named after this guy, William. What's William's last name? It's Henry Duarte was the designer that I was talking to, my 2 friends. And then William, I forget William's last name, but his nickname was Papa Willie. So they were I was what do we name this new club? They're call it Papa Willie. That's William's
half
nickname.
Of it, right? They gave you half of.
They gave us half the bar,
and
we made money.
You owned the club, or it was?
No, it was just a promotion. I
I
started as a promoter. We didn't own it, so we started as a promoter.
So how long did you run? Or
we did that for a couple of years. But when you're a kid and you're working at a gas station and you made money and you walk away and you made $500, $600, $700 cash, on a Wednesday night, you're
no brainer.
You hit this gold mine.
Yeah.
Because you worked a whole 2 weeks to make $500 and they took taxes out. So it was oh my God, this is unbelievable. So I was I'm not going back to cosmetology school. Fuck that.
So you didn't cut any more hair?
Didn't cut any more. Well, I did, but later. But I was no way. I didn't, So it was so we started doing that club, and that club ran for a year as a hot Wednesday night party. And it was a line to get in. Celebrities were coming. Young MC and Tone Loc were freestyling there, and the Beastie Boys were DJing in one room. It was there's all this, and I used to stand outside that nightclub just in awe, thinking what the heck? I'm some kid from Joshua Tree that doesn't know anybody. It was a really weird.
But do you think it was just a combination of your partner's connections and your grit and your hustle, and also the $1 thing, or was there something else about that bar or that ambiance or that feeling of being there that.
Well, we were smart enough. Like we hired great DJs. Like the DJs we hired were like known DJs in town.
Okay.
They were young. This kid Mike Messick and these other DJs, Cranny and Sheldon. And Cranny and Sheldon were like these pickers, and they would go and find these old obscure 45s and these old B-side records, and they would play like old 45s, soul, and B-sides. So they had this really crazy underground sound. And Mike Messick was like not top 40, but was more mainstream DJ, right? Yeah. So in that like underground, like the Beastie Boys would come and hang out there because these guys were known as like, they would find these crazy old records. Like they would fly to Cuba and find records, or they would go to London to swap meets. Like this is when you can only get music and records. So they just had this thing, and somehow they did it with us. So I think all those factors factored into it. The DJs, Taff, me, the location. That's what I said. It's an outliers. Right place, right time, right set of circumstances. Like, did I know that those were the best DJs and those things were going to happen? No, we had no idea. But it was just sort of like...
You were just doing it.
Yeah. There was some sort of grace that happened and allowed it to sort of be this situation.
At what point did you leave that and leave Papa Willie? And did you leave and start your own venue? Or was
like early in my career, like I'd become friends with Drew Barrymore, and she was like our cashier at Papa Willie at a young age because she was going out, and her mom was like, if she's going to go out, she might as well be with you because you're sober and you look after her, and it was probably safer for her to be with me. So we were friends, and I sort of became friends with a lot of kids in young Hollywood, and I think I saw early on that there was sort of a path in young Hollywood, right, at that young age. And so Taff and me eventually, very early, like after those first couple clubs, kind of parted ways. He really wanted to go down the road of what kids would relate to today as like EDM world, and I went down the world of like hip hop, right, young Hollywood, to put music to it. So, and I worked for myself, and very early on, I called the company in the beginning of the days, it was Brent Bolthouse Productions. Everything was Brent Bolthouse. I put my name on every invitation, on every flyer. It was like Brent Bolthouse Presents. Like it was just, and again, I don't know why I felt like that was something, but it was like making a brand out of my name unknowingly. Right.
It's something that became like, it seems like it became more popular in the last decade or so, especially with the rise of social media, where you see the founders of the companies are the face of the company, really, and they're the ones, driving the sales and driving the brand forward.
Right. So we really, and I just sort of was like, that's what I did. So, I mean, in the 90s, we controlled nightlife, and it was, and I don't say this in an egotistical way, it's just what it was. It was like you were like, oh, we're going to go to that Bolthouse party. That was just kind of a thing because I know I've talked to other people.
And you were just promoting at this time. You weren't. Did you have your own venues?
No. But what I did as a promoter and what I saw to do, and I don't know where these ideas come from because I don't have some formal schooling of like how to like corner a market. It was like I just, and again, this is perfect timing. So like people that were doing promotions went on to do other things. They started record labels, they opened bars, they went and opened hotels. And so there was this space of time where there was like a need for a promoter. And so I stepped in the 90s and started doing multiple nights a week. So I was the first promoter in the history of Los Angeles, and maybe in the country, that was I did like a Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday. So I literally controlled the week, and we were promoting at different places. But if you wanted to go out on a Monday, if you wanted to come on Thursday to the hottest thing, like at the time was like Roxbury on Thursday night was the hottest thing in the world, then you better come out on Monday and support us on Monday, or you were not getting in on Thursday. Like it was this weird thing that organically happened. We didn't plan it that way, but that's the way people saw it. It was like they just came and you were coming out on those nights, and we had a control of the market share of like you went out on those nights. And so that went on for decades like that.
What made a Bolthouse party so hot?
I mean, at the time, like I said, we were friends with a lot of celebrities, but a lot of times people weren't celebrities. Like Leo wasn't Leo when I met Leo. He was just a kid that was just maybe on a TV show that like we had a friend, like we had shared a publicist, and our mutually shared publicist was like, hey, this kid wants to come, can he go? So we were like, yeah, of course. So it's just sort of like, and that happened with everybody. right?
They
Like,
kind of rose as you were rising.
yeah, we all kind of rose together. So it was like Charlize was a model coming to like dinners and like at Roxbury, and we had no money, but she was just one of the girls that was there, and then she wins an Oscar. Like these things just happened. Like it was just, you know, what
You
I
were in a
mean?
good
Like-
place. I
Like
mean, it's
Cameron
Hollywood.
Diaz dated Carlos, who worked for me, who was doing production work for me. That was his girlfriend. She wasn't some act. You know, it was just sort of like you just knew these people that were just kind of, you know, came around, and we sort of had built this little family community. My partner Jennifer was great at like, and at that time, what I met a guy by the name of Herbie, who is like this smart Jewish kid who went to Beverly Hills High School and was super hustler, and I think he saw me and was like, just like today, like if I was like, I think he saw me going, who the fuck is that guy? And why is there a line out the door? And why is he doing this club that the whole universe is going to? And he befriended me. And he was like, and we did a few parties together, but he was the one that really taught me, like, you got to make a database. You got to get a guest list. You got to get phone numbers. Like he kind of put a little bit of business in my brain. And so early on, I started collecting people's addresses. And that became a thing. And I built up this big database. And when we started getting addresses, we were doing it on DOS, to put it in perspective, right? It was like on DOS, Macintosh didn't exist. And so it was like all on Windows. And so I started collecting things. So we had a great mailing list for a really long time that we garnished. That was like, we would send a mailing list. And, you know, at one point it was probably 10,000 names, but and it was like of people that trusted us. So if you got an invitation from us, it was like getting an invitation to your friend's wedding. You were like, you opened it, you looked at it, it wasn't junk mail. It was like, it was special. And so, and we always took pride in doing interesting invitations. Sometimes we made boxes and you open them and there was like a pyramid inside, whatever. I remember we did a promotion once where it was like called soap. And we sent you a bar of soap and it was wrapped around. It was like that night. You know, we just always thought of different interesting three-dimensional ways to do promotion. So, you know, we sort of did that. And that was kind of how we really started. And we did that for, like I said, for decades. And then somewhere in that time frame, people started asking us to do parties for them.
So this is in the 90s?
Yeah. So like, and I remember like
These are private parties?
Yeah, corporate parties. Like one of the first corporate parties we ever did was with Janet Jackson. So she would come to our clubs and had a great time. And she was like, I'm having a record release party. Will you do my record release party? I'm like, yeah. Had no idea what that meant. You're working with a record label, putting it on, doing it. We did it at like the Sony lot, and like we did this, but it was worked, and we got the right people to go. I think that's what they wanted. She wanted to have a fun party.
Brent, were you a partier at the time? I mean, you're throwing all these parties.
I've been sober.
Right.
I'm sober 31 years.
So how do you know what people want? I mean, if you're not someone who is partying and drinking and doing all the stuff that, you know, goes on there, how do you know how to organize a party like that and put something like that together?
Well, I mean, I think at some point I kind of figured it out, because what I would do is like, so in that first year it was like Brent Bolthouse presents, or it was like by the people who brought you Papa Willie. Like we sort of always knew to say, you know, like a movie. It's like, you know, and somehow you just sort of like, I connected those dots and we're like, here we did that. And so, you know, we just sort of, I don't know. Some of it is, you know, it wasn't a bit, because a lot of times, especially when you go to like, when I speak at USC or I go to Harvard and speak, it's like, what was your business plan? It was like, dude, there was no plan. There was sort of like, it was like one step led to another step to another step. I guess if anything, like from a business point of view, it was like, I wasn't scared to take steps.
Right.
Some people are scared to take steps because they don't know what's around the corner.
Right.
But I was, you know, my CFO is always, he's like, you have the ability to see around the corner.
Right.
And I guess there's some truth to that. Like I can kind of gauge like maybe what's coming or, you know.
So what's coming?
I don't know. Bungalows.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the craziest story you remember from that time? I mean, in those decades where you're throwing parties, whether it was, you know, at the clubs or at private, you know, events, what What's like one distinct memory?
So the best story I can tell is and this is the peak of like us doing multiple nights and this is in the 90s. So I get a call from Rick Rubin and Mick Jagger, and Rick's doing Mick's record, his solo record, and they call me and they say, we want to have a party. What do you say to Mick Jagger? You say yes, right?
Yeah.
You don't say no. So, but the crazy thing is this is also during a week. So we have like a Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday night club. So we got our normal clubs. They want to have a party on a Friday night. So you add that into the mix. And then on top of it, we were hired to do a thing with Age Project Los Angeles. We were helping them with a big gala they had that year, and it was the year that Madonna walked in their fashion show and she went topless. So it was like a big deal. So we were working on that. So it was this crazy week, and they call me, let's say on the Thursday, and I'm like, and they want to have the party the following Friday. So it's like 10 days away. I'm like, and I just say yes. Yeah, we'll get a house. We want to have it in the Hollywood Hills. Great. So I just start asking people in the club scene, I need a house to have a party for a client that's important, and I don't really tell people who it's for. And then, so I run into a friend of mine, this girl, Victoria, and she says, oh, maybe at my house, and let me ask my roommate. I was like, well, can I come see your house to make sure it's the right house? She says, sure. So I go up to the house, look at the house. House is perfect, right? And I don't meet her roommate then, because she wasn't around. So I said, great. I have Rick Rubin come up to the house on Monday. He looks at it and he's like, this is great. So this is Monday. And then I've got all these other things happening this week. So I was like, great. Work on the fashion show with Madonna and all this stuff. And I don't really think about that party until Friday morning when we're doing the party. We start loading in and doing stuff and setting up the bars and all this stuff. And so I get there Friday morning, we're setting up those bars, we're doing things, and I kind of look around and there's a bunch of girls, there's a handful of girls at the house, and they're all cute and whatever, and I'm kind of looking around, and so then I see Victoria, my friend, and she was like, oh, come meet my roommate. So I go in the house, I go meet her roommate, and her roommate is this girl named Heidi Fleiss, who at the time was the biggest madam in Hollywood, right? So you guys don't remember it, but it was E! News Daily, TMZ headline. It would be
it would be breaking news.
It's breaking news,
Yeah.
right? So what happened is Heidi Fleiss got caught, and she had a black book, and everyone got in her book got caught. It was
This
breaking.
is before the party?
No, this is years before.
Years later.
This is years before
Oh,
she
I see,
became
I see.
famous.
This is the
But
online version of that. I can't remember what the name of the website was, where it was basically the book, but it was all online where they released the names of the guys.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but just being a person who's in the nightclub scene in Hollywood, I was like, oh, I know who this person is.
Yeah.
I knew who she was, and I was like, oh shit, I'm doing a party for Mick Jagger and Rick Rubin at the biggest madam in Hollywood's house, and I'm like, and it's Friday and the party's tonight. So I was like, I can't change it. And I was like, I'm not going to tell him, right? So we just end up doing it, and it was just the craziest party. It was traffic, people can't get in, like Prince coming up the driveway, the Red Hot Trip. It was so crowded and crazy. Red Hot trailers couldn't get in, so they scaled this hillside, climbed the fence in the back to get into the party. It was just a crazy party. Johnny Depp was DJing. It was just a really fun, legendary party. The funny part about that party is, right? So years later, Heidi Fleiss gets caught. Someone, I'm sure she did it with him, they write a tell-all book, right? And in the opening chapters of that book, it says Heidi Fleiss talks about her Hollywood coming out party, how she was embraced by Hollywood, right? And it's Prince walking up the driveway, the dark-haired, mysterious girl at the door checking people in, who's Jennifer, my partner. She talks about everything that happened in that party, right? And I'm just going, that's a bunch of fucking shit. That party had nothing to do with you. It was just a complete roll of the dice that we ended up at Heidi Fleiss's house. And, but she sort of positioned it as her big Hollywood coming out party, and she was part of the Hollywood thing. And it was just one of those things. It was like Jack Nicholson's there, like Robert De Niro. It was just one of those crazy legendary parties, which to this day I think is pretty funny that it ended up being that way, and it was at her house. It's pretty shocking.
So, just a few minutes ago, you brought up bungalows, and I know that you've done much more than that. So, at what point did you start venturing into opening your own places? I know at one point you partnered with SBE. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about that journey?
So, it really started. I did a nightclub in Las Vegas at the Hard Rock Hotel called Body English, which we're still doing nightclubs in LA. We did that, and that was a really huge success. So it was like Light was there, and then Body English came. It was like, and it was really before all the nightclubs were happening in Las Vegas, and we sort of brought DJ AM to Vegas, and like that really became a huge success in Las Vegas. And in the process of doing that, I met Sam Nazarian, and he hadn't really started SBE at that time. I think maybe he had bought in one property, and nothing had really opened, or they were even going to do anything yet. I think he had maybe done his deal with Philippe Stark to figure out what to do. So he came to Body English. I let him sit at my table, and we sort of just said, we went to lunch and just sort of talked about it. And sort of, Sam sort of laid out his vision of what he thought it was going to do. And we made a partnership. Like, I think I was Sam's first partner.
Were you part of SBE, or was it more like a joint venture between?
No. It was a partnership. So we were a partner in the company, and we eventually sold our interest in it. But it was really trying to set up this thing. So, it worked for 5 or 6 years, and then it just sort of I think Sam sees the world differently than I see the world, and I have a different philosophy on how to take care of hospitality and what hospitality is. So it just felt like it was better to part ways, and sort of he'll do what he does and I'll do what I do. It's like I didn't.
What is your vision of hospitality?
Well, I mean, today I think the Bungalow encapsulates exactly what I think hospitality is. I think hospitality in Hollywood today it's completely a disaster. I think it is a disaster. I think it's this weird phenomenon where bottle service started driving everything. Like when we did nightclubs, it would be you got into our nightclubs because we either just liked you, and we had a sense that you were like a good person, or you were cool, or you were a celebrity. And it was sort of a curated experience of like, maybe there's somebody buying a bottle, but maybe there's a group of models, and maybe there's some pro skateboarders, and maybe there's an actor. Like, it was sort of this interesting curation of people in the room. It wasn't just, you have $5,000, you got $10,000, you got $15,000. Great, you guys are now all sitting next to each other, and you guys are going to bring all these girls to it. It was like,
right.
There was something interesting. There was more interest in sort of the curation of it. So I just think that, it's like, I think New York had Studio 54, where they had that moment that was like those great few years, where I think Los Angeles had the 90s and 2000s, where we were sort of running things, was like this a decade and a half of like really special time in LA, where it's like, if you were in, it was like this, it was a great time, and you ran it. It was like seeing all your old familiar friends on a Monday night. Like, it was like, great, that's what we had. And I've talked to a lot of people that were like, yeah, it was just different, and it wasn't driven by money, because we weren't driven by money. We were like, we brought bottle service to Los Angeles. I was in Europe, I experienced it in France, and I brought it. We did it at Joseph's on Monday nights, and it was the first nightclub in the city to do bottle service. Like, and we did it, but we did it in a way that wasn't like every table wasn't for sale.
Wasn't obnoxious.
Some tables were for sale, and some tables we kept for certain people. So, but that was sort of, a different time. I always say that Hyde is the line in the sand. Before Hyde, and then there's after Hyde. Before Hyde, things were different. After Hyde, things have changed big time. Right, Hyde was sort of that delineation, because Hyde is where TMZ was birthed.
Yep.
That guy stood, I don't forget his name, but he stood outside there.
Harvey Levin?
Yeah, Harvey stood outside Hyde with the camera and sort of started TMZ standing outside Hyde, which was...
And you were part of the creation of Hyde, right?
Hyde, I named it, I created it, it was our idea. It was like, I always think it's funny that Hyde is a brand that still Sam does things with, but he likes to tell people that it was like Hyde, like a skin of a cow, and I'm like, no, it was named after Hyde Park in London, and because in the beginning of that, we only played.
And those are spelled completely differently too. Hyde Park and
yeah, because Hyde Park is such a musical place, and we really wanted. I looked at the first small Hyde on Sunset for me was like, instead of doing a big club, it was like a bar where we would play like rock or alternative. It was, you just had a little freedom to play some fun music. It wasn't like because you couldn't really do dancing in there. I mean, Hyde was it was like a little bit bigger than the room we're in now. Like it only held 80 people, right? That's what people don't realize. It was like 80 people could fit in that room, and that's packed. Yeah. So of course people are going to get turned away because you can only put 80 people in a place. It was like pretty crazy. So, but it ran white hot for a minute there. It's pretty insane.
So there's Area, there's Foxtail, there's Katsuya, XIV with Michael Mina. What was all that like?
So, Area was super successful. That was my idea to create like a nightclub that felt like a mid-century modern home. And Foxtail didn't work the way it was supposed to work. Unfortunately, it was sort of, I think we had an identity problem there. We had problems with the city. Some things didn't work because it was supposed to be a restaurant and a little nightclub upstairs, and it never really got there. And I don't know, we could pick it apart why it didn't work, but for some reason it didn't work. And 14 with Michael Mina was, I think Michael Mina just came to LA before his time. I think if he opened a restaurant today like that, I think it would be a home run. He had a tasting menu paired with a vegan tasting menu. And again, I think we didn't let Michael have enough time to sort of let it incubate and sort of let the community get what it was. It was an expensive project, and we had, SBE became a lot about like what was the bottom line. They took a lot of institutional money, and when you start when bean counters start to make creative decisions, I think you have problems in any creative business. And nightlife is a creative business. You can't always let that be the driver of that car, and that's part of how I see hospitality. Like I think if I learned anything from SB, it's like how to do things not as expensively, because Sam liked to do things really expensive. He liked to operate in an expensive world. That's the world he came from. Mm-hmm. Nothing against him. That's just what he knew. And it was like, but then when you look at a budget for the year and you're looking at the CFO and he's like, you got to hit 100%, 365 days a year. It's like, well, no. Monday's not going to do the same money as Saturday, but why? But you can't build a budget that way.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and then your decisions are based upon, or you're making decisions on like, well, you're going to give me 5, but you'll give me 10. But maybe you have cuter girls, but you have more money. We'll go for the money. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, is the party better or worse because the cute girls aren't there?
Yeah.
I think it's worse. And it's a slow erosion over time, right?
Yeah. So that partnership with SB sort of ended in like 2009ish, right? And then
I think so. I don't know exactly the time.
And then, I think that's what it says online. So let's just go with that. Yeah.
Yeah, then, I go with that. Yeah.
Wikipedia is the best resource these days.
Sometimes, except also Wikipedia says I'm worth $45 million. But I want that money. I don't know where. I wonder if you can get the money.
Wikipedia, that was an ask from Brent Bolthouse. Just sent him over the 45 million, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you launched Bungalow in 2012. So in those few years, I know you had a few different projects like Neon Carnival, I think, right? Like
still
around,
do that, yeah.
In the middle of that.
So we started. Process. So after SBE, I went and published a magazine called 944, which was around for a few years, and then we went and did Truesdale, which was a nightclub on Sunset with Guy Starkman and Darren, who now Darren works with the One Oak guys. And we did that. That was pretty fun and exciting, and that was great. Like that was a great opportunity, and I think that was another, nightclub where we sort of used our philosophy, where it was like, let's make it an interesting room with interesting people and sell some tables, not all the tables, right? Like I think there's that whole world of like, you can't sell them all, and so, and then we sold that, and. In there, shortly after that, I met the owners of the Fairmont Hotel, and they had a property that was interesting, and and they went months down the road in negotiations with another restaurant group that I'm not going to name, and but I think that restaurant group at the time, they were a young company, and I think they kind of phoned it in, and they didn't put a lot of thought into it. I think they didn't present a great offering, and we presented something much more compelling that was the Bungalow. It was completely different than what they were presenting, because I got to see what they were presenting, and I made sure it was completely different than what it is. And the owners of that hotel made a decision to go with us, which I think was the right decision. But those other guys, they always seem to tell the story that I stole their idea of Bungalow, and it's always funny to me that
Well, it was great.
our idea had nothing to do with them. We made sure we had nothing, not one piece of furniture looks like anything they presented. So I just think it's funny.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great idea, whatever it was, because I mean, I've been to Bungalow, you have two, and it's we always say like the line is just ridiculous. Like
it's crazy.
Sometimes I just like choose not to go because of how long the line is, unless you can.
But you go because the line, if you stand in line, you're going to get in.
Yeah, right. And when you're in, it's. I mean,
so part of our philosophy at the Bungalow was making tables reasonable. If you buy a table and not having a doorman, not having a situation, it was like everyone's welcome. It was a neighborhood bar, right? So, and lines suck. No one likes lines, but people still go to Disneyland, and there's lines at Disneyland. And I think if there's the idea that you're going to get in, it's different than if you stand in line and you meet some doorman and he's like, I don't like your hat. You're not getting in, right? Like that's just like, I think there's a different thing. And, knock on wood, 6.5 years later, we're still there.
And I think the reason for that is because one, you've either been there and the good vibes and just I think it's the people that makes it what it is, or you haven't been there and you've heard so many stories of, dude, you got to go to the Bungalow. Like it's such great vibes around there. Like you need to go, and so that's why people wait in line. I think that's like a testament to obviously.
But we had a line from the first Friday. We opened on a Thursday. Donovan Leitch, the singer from the '60s, performed, and then the next Friday, there was a line. Like it's from the day one, we've had a line of people who were excited about that project,
which is a great sign.
Which is a great sign. Yeah, we sort of didn't anticipate it to be quite as busy as it was, and we had to scramble to meet demand. But I mean, we thought we knew it'd be great, and we just didn't know how we would hit such a zeitgeist of like, we obviously hit a nerve in culture, at least in Los Angeles, and I think around the world, of people liking that offering.
So that was in Santa Monica, and then you launched Huntington Beach.
Like we opened 1.5 years ago in Huntington Beach. It'll be 2 years in August, I guess.
So what is like? How do you see the future panning out for the Bungalow project specifically?
So we're gonna do one in San Francisco next.
Awesome.
We haven't really announced it, but it's something up in the Bay Area, and we're pretty close to closing a deal in San Diego. So. And then we're looking at all kinds of deals all over. Like every day I'm looking at, it seems like we get new offers and new deals. Some make sense, some don't make sense. And sometimes you spend, like we spent years working on a deal in Redondo Beach, and then it ended up not happening. They couldn't get the permits. Or they're still trying to get the permits. Maybe they will. But so it's just sort of like it seems like it's a long process.
Yeah.
Does the Bungalow in any way reflect you, your personality, your character, your
100%.
lifestyle?
Yeah. So Bungalow is really the way I like to live my life. Like I make the playlist for the music. It's all music. To this day. I was there yesterday, like deleting some songs, adding some songs, like because I think a soundscape is such an important aspect to any social experience, personally or in a bar. Like I think it's so important. So. And just making something comfortable that you like to live in that feels like a house. That was, we wanted the Bungalow to feel like a house party or a house. Like that was important to me. Like we really wanted. We spent a lot of time with the designers. That was really important to me, and making sure they felt that, and that came across. And I think we hit that because people tell us all the time it feels like a great house party.
Brent, I know we've been with you for almost an hour now, and I mean your story is obviously super inspirational from your childhood to cutting hair, which by the way, you said you cut hair after that at one point. When did you cut hair after that?
So somewhere like in there, like I was promoting, and then like maybe I didn't have any promotion. So I went back and worked for a friend of mine by the name of Kaz at his salon for a few months, 6 months, a year. I don't know, where I sort of didn't have a job. And I was like, oh, I can go cut hair. I know how to do that. And at that moment, I was friends with everybody in town. So I was cutting movie stars' hairs and rock stars and doing stuff. And it was like, oh yeah, it was like, Cal was like, please stay.
Who was the coolest person's hair that you cut?
Peter Gabriel.
Amazing.
Yeah. And he just came in and did it. I was like, that's cool. That's Peter Gabriel. That's what the hell?
But yeah, I cut myself off earlier, but what I was about to say was, you're so inspirational. The story's inspirational. What you're doing to this day and continuing to build and grow and create such an awesome experience for this LA community. Who is your inspiration?
So, I mean, I get inspiration. I mean, inspiration can be anywhere, right? You can get inspiration from all kinds of people.
If you had to choose just one person or one thing.
I mean, somebody who's been super impactful and inspirational in my life was like Tony Robbins. Did a great series called Power Talk. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, this is when there was cassettes. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not the I Am Not Your Guru days. It's way before.
No, but I think that's a great documentary.
Yeah.
But he would do these things called Power Talks where he would interview, say, a Deepak Chopra or he would just do these interviews with interesting people. And that was such an inspirational thing for me of hearing what other, because that's really kind of the way I've learned and I've educated myself is I've always listened to books on tape, which is now iTunes. But back then you could go to stores, you would go into a store, rent book on tape, and you could put it in a Walkman and listen. And I've been doing that since I was like 19. Like I always was self-educating myself and always looking towards inspirational things. So like Dale Carnegie was a huge inspiration to me. Like when I read How to Win Friends and Influence People, like was really impactful of like, oh, that's a way to kind of have yourself in the world. And I think, so those kind of things always like, those kind of people inspired me. Hearing other people's struggles. Like I remember reading about Abraham Lincoln and just realizing that he failed at public office like 50 times before he even got into public office, right? And you just think of like, well, if he quit on the 37th try, we wouldn't have had one of the greatest presidents of all time, right? Like you just think that like, and so for me, like those kinds of stories really taught me to be always persistent, always to get back on the horse, always to never, and if you fall, get back, keep going, like, because you're never going to win the race if you fall and don't get back up.
Yeah.
Right? You just lose the race. So it was like hearing those kind of stories of, I mean, most great businessmen and most people in industry, like if you really, and this is kind of before biography became biography, I was always digging for those stories and just sort of like, if it's like how many times did Ford fail before he got a car to work? Like all those kind of stories where you just realize that like, wow, they put everything on the line and they made it work, And so those are the people, and there's a long list of those stories and books that I've read that just sort of like have inspired me in my own life of like, okay, the one thing I got out of that is you never give up.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can't.
Yeah. I want to kind of end on this note. You've had an amazing career so far in hospitality. I want to kind of talk a little bit about your career in film. You've been in some TV shows, some music videos. I was watching the Jessica Simpson one last night.
That's right.
Where you were the DJ. So you've been in like the Entourage, The Hills. Tell us why that came about. I know you've been around Hollywood during your career, but how did that come about?
So early in my career, I had friends that were like directors, and they always thought it was cute to put me in movies. If it's like being the DJ, because
it's easy to work with, probably. Just like don't
probably, but I mean, I do DJ, and I've always DJed my whole career. We started doing that very early on. I would play would play like rock because I loved rock, and I would always like play rock and roll. But like early on, they made me do that, and then like Entourage. We knew the guys that wrote on some of the writers on Entourage and some of the creators, and we knew Doug, and we knew. Rob Weiss, and they were like in our clubs going out, and they were like, and they really wanted to make Entourage authentic. So we sort of, they were like, can we film at your place and would you be in a scene? So it was like pretty harmless and, pretty true to life. And I think, like part of that is like why The Hills was successful, right? It was rooted in people having real jobs and real places, and it was filmed in LA, and you were going into real nightclubs and into real restaurants, and you really saw it, and it was like, you could watch The Hills about area and then read about why on Thursday Jessica Simpson was there in People magazine, right? It was all connected and it made it all somewhat real. But it was really kind of like I didn't really want a career in TV or film. It just sort of like happened. And like The Hills was, you know, my friends at MTV, because I was friends with all the executives over there, they were like, I don't know, do the show. If you don't like it or it's weird, fire the girl. We don't care about you. You're our friend, and we work together, and we do parties together. Like, we were doing a lot of stuff for MTV at the time. Yeah. And so they were just like, if it doesn't make sense for you, then get rid of her, and then we're out of your office. Yeah. Like, we don't care about you. The show wasn't about you. You know what I mean? And we didn't know at the time. We're like, okay. And then it became The Hills, which was this crazy phenomenon for a handful of years.
I remember that.
Yeah, which is, again, another bizarre thing, which I think SBE got more out of that than I got out of it. I just got hassled in airports in weird parts of the country.
Well, Brent, it's been an amazing conversation. Sitting down with you and hearing your story from where you were, in your childhood and high school days to where you are now, and it is a big inspiration. And I think we're really excited. I think I speak for both of us when we say we're really excited to see where you take, where your projects go next, especially the Bungalow, and hopefully,
me too.
Yeah, hopefully, we see a Bungalow in, I don't know, every city pretty soon.
I don't know if every city. I think Bungalow as a brand can go to certain cities, right?
Yeah.
We need it. It's a big place, and we need to have certain elements, so it can't go everywhere. But we're also going to do some other smaller bars and other projects, and hopefully, at least a couple more Bungalows would be real nice.
I wouldn't be complaining.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brent.
Thanks,
Brent.
Thanks for tuning in. You can catch Brent and follow more of his journey at Brent Bolthouse on Instagram and Twitter. Make sure to also give us a follow at The Founder Hour and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on new releases, giveaways, and more at thefounderhour.com. Also, if you could please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Spotify, we would really appreciate it. See you next week.